everyone. On behalf of the Public Library of Mount Vernon, Ohio, and the Break Bread Literacy Project, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janine. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from New York City. For some reason, my chat is kind of being funky, so moving right along. Angel Garcia is a proud son of Mexican immigrants and is the author of Teeth Never Sleep, University of Arkansas Press, winner of Canto Mundo Poetry Prize, winner of the American Book Award, and finalist for PEN America Open Book Award, and Kate Tufts Discovery Award. He currently lives in Champaign, Illinois, and teaches in the MFA program at the University of Illinois.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Super excited to be here and share space with you all tonight. The workshop we're going to be doing today, I just titled Superpowers and Changemaking because I want us to think of ways in which we can be change makers, right? The ways in which we can have power. And so I'll start off by giving a little bit of information about me. This is me when I was young, when I did not have any superpowers. I was not particularly fast. I was not particularly skilled in, any kind of way. And because in so many ways I felt powerless, I became obsessed with like comic books, right? And superheroes, because those were people who had control over their own lives, right? And control, and it could exert their power, right? And so, little me, little Angel wanted to kind of grow up and be able to find out what that was for myself. But we'll start with a definition. What is a superhero, right? Because I obviously wanted to be a superhero. My first one, I'll let you know now, I'm really embarrassed about this, was my name was Roly Poly Man, and I would roll down the hallway on top of my brothers, right? And that was the extent of my ability. But a superhero, as you see, is a fictional hero having extraordinary or superhuman powers, right? That kind of go above and beyond. And like I said, I was obsessed pretty early on with superheroes. Growing up, I would watch like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? Power Rangers, and I would read comic books and what else? And buy like comic cards, right? And watch cartoons. And so I would, my first kind of obsession was again with Marvel comics, and Wolverine was someone that, I don't know, it was just a cool character, right? Cool costume, cool abilities. But I wanted to maybe hear from some other folks in terms of what those superpowers might have looked like for Wolverine. Maybe we can throw some in the chat and maybe share what some of those kind of superpowers. And if you're not super familiar with Wolverine, I'm sure someone else will know. So what are some superpowers that Wolverine had? Yeah, regeneration, I think. I don't know anything about Wolverine. Cool. Yeah, he was able to heal himself, right? So he would get a wound and then his body would heal itself kind of magically, right? You'll notice from the picture, along with the cool costume, he had an adamantium skeleton, and that included those claws, right? So those claws could go out on their own will, depending on when he wanted to. He was super fast, superhuman strength. Yeah, definitely. Lots of different abilities, right? Another character that you all may or may not be familiar with, let's see really quickly, is Storm. Anyone familiar with Storm from the Marvel comic universe? Yes. All right. We got someone. Anyone? Are you familiar with her powers?
I am not as well as I would hope, but she, I believe, has the power to control the weather.
Yeah.
And primarily, I'm really interested in her being one of the first Black female superheroes.
Yeah, definitely. So someone I could relate to, right? As a person of color, she has a really interesting backstory that was not kind of US origin, right? USA origin. had the power to harness kind of natural elements, right? So she could control lightning and rain and wind and like create a tornado, and could fly, right? Which is like one of the kind of most common superhuman strengths that people really want, desire for themselves. So in talking about superpowers, we typically also talk about what that superpower is and what that ability or what that effect is, right? Let's take, for example, some of the ones that we have there. With super strength, I might be able to move things, right? I might be able to lift things, right? None of which I'm able to do as a human being. I don't have like a max, weight that I can lift. But right, with super strength, I would be able to do things that I wouldn't normally be able to do. Another common superpower, right, is invisibility. I could just like disappear and no one would see me, so I could, sneak into places, right? What else could I do with invisibility? What are some of the effects that might be to my advantage? Anyone can just throw that in the chat. Or others, right? Mind control. I want to be able to have power. I can tell people to make me a sandwich. Yeah, good, Oz, right? I'm able to kind of have privacy, which I may or may not have. Moving objects remotely. Yeah. Disappear from awkward social situations with invisibility. Yes, for me, I love that one. That's why I want that superpower, right? If I see someone that I don't generally get along with, poof, I'm invisible, right? When I'm, feeling uncomfortable, poof, I am, able to disappear. Super speed, right? I might be able to kind of just run around the world, right? I might be able to travel places. I might be able to, just do things more quickly than the average human. And then time travel, right? Like if I could just poof myself back into the past or poof myself into the future, something that might, really change the kind of history or course of history, right? In terms of, we always say that, we might want to go in the past and change something that was maybe detrimental in terms of its happenings, right? So when we're thinking about superpowers, or when we continue to think about superpowers for the purpose of this workshop, I want us thinking about what they are and what they do, right? Because that's really important. I should say at this point that whenever I imagined myself being a superhero, it was always kind of the typical ways that we're supposed to be a superhero, right? So some of my responsibilities as a superhero is to make the world a better place, right? And typically the way I'm going to do that is I am going to protect the public, right? Protect humanity, protect a particular place that I live in, right? And then the other kind of major thing is that you're fighting crime, right? Or you're fighting evil forces that are trying to end humanity or destroy the world, right? So with my superpower, super strength, maybe I'm doing something to kind of remedy that and make sure that doesn't happen. A little bit more difficult, maybe with invisibility, right? I'm like sneaking up on people and doing something to kind of better the world, better the place that I'm living in. So I'm going to stop talking, I swear, and then we're going to get writing in a little bit. What I want us to kind of consider about superhero, right, is that it's almost all, because it has that word super in it, which is important maybe, it always seems fictional, right? We see superheroes in kind of fictional movies, right? We see them in comic books, we see them in cartoons. There's something that movies are made of, right? And it really relies on the power of imagination and not necessarily the reality that we live in, right? So we have kind of alternate universes where Spider-Man lives and where Batman lives and where Wonder Woman lives, right? They live in places that don't necessarily exist because everything is kind of fictional about a superhero, right? But what I want us to maybe consider, and the purpose of this workshop, is that there is power in poetry, right? That it can have an actual effect in the real world, right? Someone can read a poem and be moved by it, right? Someone can read a poem and maybe feel less alone, right? Someone can read a poem and be inspired to do something positive in the world, right? So the power of poetry, unlike superpowers and kind of the power of superheroes, right, is that you can make your own reality, right? And that you can make change, whether that's change in yourself, whether that's change in your community, or making the world kind of at large a better place, right? And the imagination is what fuels this ability to kind of make those changes in the poems, right? But also outside of the poems. So I'll give you an example, right? If I wrote a poem, and this has happened in the past, right? And there's a young person in the room who is particularly moved by that, right? They might be inspired then to go write a poem themselves, right? And then that is the power, right? It's passed from one person to another. And so it's not me hoarding that power, right? Much like we're doing in this classroom, we're going to kind of exhibit and share some of that power, okay? So we're going to read 2 poems today. I'm going to kind of get off this PowerPoint and I'll read them out loud, and then I'm going to ask for some responses in the chat, right? Because we're reading this cold, it doesn't have to be like, right answers. It doesn't have to be brilliant answers. I'm just looking for any kind of response you have. And what I want you maybe noticing in either of these poems is what the speaker or what the person speaking is able to do, right? What power do they have, right? What power are they exhibiting? And most importantly, right, what are they trying to change, right? Because with our powers, we have maybe a responsibility, right, to do something. So this is A Prayer for My People by Matthew Shinoda. I'll go ahead and read it, and then we can also chat about it, okay? A prayer for my people, that one day we will wish to be nothing more than what we are, that we will see it within ourselves, the liberation of nations, of concrete, that we will understand the inevitability in the lines of our hands. There is a war raging in our backyard, with it my sister's spirit burns, that the fire of my sister's spirit will consume our enemies and burn our streets clean. There's a system of mangled necks whose heads speak with oracle tongues, that we should learn to walk with wounded feet, that our eyes must be liberated from their granite, that our hands reroot themselves from the pools of acid rain. There's a river forming in the bureaucrat's head. It's made from rusted milk, that we may understand this false constructed world and know holy things do not die. A Prayer for My People by Matthew Shinoda. So what are some abilities that this speaker is talking about in this poem? We can think about them as superpowers, or maybe even much more subtle than superpowers. What are they trying to change, or what are they trying to affect in regard to that change?
Hey, also, Angel, I forgot to mention, because of the hustle and bustle at the beginning, because we're in webinar, and we only have 4 participants, I'm going to go ahead and let our participants talk. And then that way they can just engage more directly with you.
Okay,
so
great.
Everybody enjoy the thrill of being you're all panelists now.
Nice.
That way it'll just be a little bit easier, I think, to have a real conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yes, and I get to hear voices too, which is makes me less nervous and much more happy. So what do you all think of this poem? What are some just initial responses? We don't even have to answer that question yet in terms of superpowers. Charlize, go for it.
Sorry, I'm too shy to just unmute. I really like the kind of revolutionary spirit of it, especially when it's talking about fire and the way that I don't know if that counts as a superpower, but the consuming of the old and in favor of the new, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great response. What comes to mind is that word regeneration that I think Oz put in the chat later, right? That from something previously, right, you're making it new. So that's a great, I mean, I think that's a superpower. Some other responses in terms of things that stood out for you, things that you enjoyed. Something that always kind of resonates with me is the end of this poem, right? That there's maybe a sense of immortality, right? That nothing is going to perish, right? That we as a people, right? And it's really important that he's saying we, right? Because that's all of us. That's all of us in the poem. That's all of us in the real world. That's all of us in this room right now, right? That even though there might be things that cause pain, right, or cause suffering, here is the kind of the statement being made at the end, right? Holy things do not die, right? And maybe we are those holy things, right? Maybe we are those kind of blessed beings that might achieve immortality. It's a kind of very subtle statement being made, right? But there is power being exhibited in this poem, right? Even the kind of statement that we, that are, right? It's kind of taking ownership of all of these different abilities that the speaker's asking us to consider. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. If there are any other comments, feel free to unmute yourself while I find this longer poem. And again, what I kind of want you all to be thinking about or noticing, right, is what resonates with you, what stands out, what kind of makes you feel something. And then to kind of think about, secondly, right, some of the ability and some of the power in this poem that's being exhibited. What is the speaker accomplishing? So this is Arroz Poetica by Araceli Germay. And for those of you who may not know, arroz is rice in Spanish. And it's a play on this idea of the Ars Poetica, right? Which is a poem about writing poetry, right? So if you're not familiar with either of these poets, I would recommend that you look them up. There's great collections that they've both written. Arroz Poetica by Araceli Germay. I got news yesterday that a friend of mine that all people against the world should send a bag of rice to George Bush. And on the bag, we should write, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. But to be perfectly clear, my enemies are not hungry. They are not standing in lines for food or stretching rations or waiting at the airports to claim the pieces of the bodies of their dead. My enemies ride jets to parties. They are not tied up in pens in Guantanamo Bay. They are not young children throwing rocks. My enemies eat meats and vegetables at tables in white houses where candles blaze, cast shadows of crosses and flowers. They wear ball gowns and suits and rings to talk of war in neat and folded languages that will not stain their formal dinner clothes or tussle their hair. They use words like casualties to speak of murder. They are not stripped down to skin and made to stand barefoot in the cold or hot. They do not lose their children to this war. They do not lose their houses and their streets. They do not come home to find their lamps broken. They do not ever come home to find their families murdered or disappeared or guns put at their faces. Their children are not made to walk a field of mines exploding. This is no wedding. This is no feast. I will not send George Bush rice, worked for rice from my own kitchen where it sits in a glass jar and I am transfixed by the thousands of beautiful pieces like a watcher at some homemade and dry aquarium of grains. While the radio calls out the local names of 2,000 US soldiers counted dead since March. And we all know it. And there will always be more than what's been counted. They will not say the names of an Iraqi family trying to pass a checkpoint in an old white van, a teenager caught out on some road after curfew. The radio will go on shouting the names, and I promise you they will not call your name Hasna Ali Sabah, age 30, killed by a missile in Al-Basra, or you, Ibrahim Al-Yusuf, or the sons of Saeed Shahis, or the farm outside of Baghdad, or Ibrahim, age 12, as if your blood were any less red, as if the skins that melted were any less skin and the bones that broke were any less bone, as if your eradication were any less absolute, any less eradication from this earth where you were not a president or a military soldier. And you will not ever walk home again or smell your mother's hair again or shake the date palm tree or smell the sea or hear the people singing at your wedding or become old or dream or breathe or even pray or whistle. And your tongue will be all gone or useless, and it will not ever say again or ask a question, you who were birthed once and given milk and given names that mean she is born at night, happy, favorite daughter, morning, heart, father of a multitude. Your name I will have noticed on a list collected by an Iraqi census of the dead, because your name is the name of my own brother, because your name is the Tigrina word for tomorrow, because all my life I have wanted a farm, because my students are 12, because I remember when my sisters were 12, and I will not have ever seen your eyes, and you will not have ever seen my eyes or the eyes of the ones who dropped the missiles or the eyes of the ones who ordered the missiles, and the missiles have no eyes. You had no chance. The way they fell on avenues and farms, on clocks and school children. There was no place for you, and so you burned. A bag of rice will not bring you back. A poem cannot bring you. And although it is my promise here to try to open every one of my windows, I cannot imagine the intimacy with which a life leaves its body, even then, in detonation, when the skull is burst, and the body's country of indivisible organs flames into the everything. And even in that quick departure, as the life rushes on headlong or backwards, there must be some singing as the hands waves, be well, or its other hand, goodbye. And the ear belongs to the field now, and we cannot separate the roof from the heart, from the trees that were there standing. And so it is when I say night, it is your name I am calling. When I say field, your thousand names, your million names. Aros Poetica by Araceli Hermay. So what are some things that stood out for you all? This is a long poem, a very powerful poem. What are some moments that resonated with you that made you feel something, think something? Or tell me about your experience of the poem. Shelley's?
I really like that poem.
Mhm.
I hadn't heard it before, but like I might have a new favorite poem.
Yay.
I think the part that was most interesting to me was like the way the stanzas were divided, and like especially how the second stanza feels physically crisper when it's talking about like talking of war in folded languages. I thought that was like such an expressive way to like put into words how like cold and bureaucratic that sort of stuff can be. But yeah, this resonated with me a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Others in the room, what were some experiences you had while reading or hearing the poem? And someone put something in the chat, I think. Casualties is another word for murder. Reminds me of Layli Long Soldier's line in history books, conflict is used for genocide. Oh, really great connection. Two great poets that I think in so many ways are in conversation with each other, right? About some of the challenges and atrocities, right, that people face. Great observation, Oz. Some other reactions? Yeah, go for it, Jenny.
I think we see a lot about like the power of naming and like the power of names. And in the earlier poem, I mentioned that like oracles or like foretelling powers always stand out to me. And like the power in giving something a name is kind of similar to that in that vein.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting goosebumps. That's such an important thing, right? It seems like a subtle power, but to evoke a name, particularly the names of people who might be forgotten, right? Who might not be noticed. And she says these names, right? And she gives them life in this kind of dirge that she's repeating these names, saying these names, right? Honoring them in so many ways. And so, yeah, even though there is a lot of destruction and devastation and death in this poem, right? There's something to that naming that I think is a superpower, right? You will not be forgotten, right? You are my brother, you are my sister. There's a connection between us. And this is what the speaker is doing, right? They're noticing the connections between themselves, right, and the people who are victims of this war, right? That's a really powerful thing to do. One might call it empathy, right? One might call it just connecting on a human level to other people. And so, yeah, a really great observation, Janine. Okay. Again, both of these are online. There's actually a video of Araceli Germay reading this poem. If you just Google Aros Poetica, right, you'll find something there. And so I'm gonna just pop back into the PowerPoint real quick. Just kidding. Let me try one more time.
It is really testing us today.
No,
I'm so
it's
sorry.
also it's also my I'm rusty. I'm rusty on
Yeah.
film, so it's been a while.
I think you're doing great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We kind of talked a little bit about this, and I want us to get to the writing, right? But while these may not be superpowers, right, kind of more than powers that are superhuman, right? I do want us to consider that both of these poems are utilizing a specific kind of power, right? And then if we're thinking about this in a very kind of smaller and larger way, the poems themselves have power, right? Because now we've read them, right? Someone has said that this might be a new favorite poem, and I'm sure that poem that might also include sharing this poem with other people, right? So this is kind of the power of poetry, right? You all are looking at the PowerPoint, just to clarify? Yeah, okay. So this is what I want us to do. We're going to get to the writing, which is the best part. I'm going to ask the question, and this is kind of the prompt for you. What power or powers do you have, right? And, this doesn't have to be in the kind of superpower realm, right? But what power or powers do you have? And it can be more than one power, right? Something that, you're skilled in, something that you imagine you're able to do because of the uniqueness of who you are, right? That maybe no one else can do, or maybe other people who have the superpower. These powers can be real or imagined, right? So they don't necessarily have to live in the world that we know, right? And then I want you to do your best to describe what they are and what they do, right? To kind of see them enacted, okay? So I'm going to give us maybe about 5 minutes on this little handy dandy timer, which may not be enough, but I want you to just think about this as not necessarily writing a poem just yet, but list making, right? From that list, we'll be able to pull things and elaborate on things, but no pressure to write a poem just yet. These are just kind of generating ideas, okay? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to answer that question. What power or powers do you have? Go for it. All right. I would love to hear from some folks. What superpowers do you have, or what powers do you have? Anyone want to share? You can share in the chat. You can share by unmuting yourself. Just a little note, you know, in terms of superheroes, right, we got to have a little bit of hubris. We got to have a little bit of ego, so to share our powers, right? So Oz, thank you. First thing I thought of was poetry. Nice. All right. So your mind's already in the game, right? In terms of what we're doing here today. Great. That's, I think, one of my superpowers too. So great. Anyone else? Other folks?
I definitely went the more like fantastical route.
Mhm.
So keeping with the theme, I said like future seeing or like future telling, be able to tell the future. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Great. Definitely, I agree with Oz. One of mine, I think, is being able to kind of make poems. But something that I feel like just in real life, and then I'll do like a purely imaginary one, is that I love teaching, right? I love being able to just instill knowledge in other people, right? So I think that's a power. It's not very fancy, right? But it's something that I hold kind of really near and dear to myself. But some other folks, and then I'll get to the fantastical one. Fantastic one for me, and this just, it's again ego based. My name's Angel. I would love to be able to fly, right? You know, have that big set of wings that just kind of take me wherever I want to go. And it's cheaper than flying commercial. So there's that too, right? All right, so we'll move on to this next portion. And these again are just kind of informal list making, so no real pressure. What purpose do your powers serve, right? So if my ability is to maybe teach and I have wings, right? What do I actually want to change in the world, right? What kind of effect do I want my superpowers to have? So you might want to think specifically about what you would like to see changed in the world, right? Or how you yourself are going to change that with your powers, the kind of effects that it will create, right? And then in this kind of list making, even though we're still just list making, right? Thinking about verbs, right? And actions that you can take as a change maker, right? So what are you actually doing with those superpowers? So think kind of specifically along those lines. I'm going to give us a little bit less time for this one, just so that we can kind of move on to, again, the making of the poem. So I'm going to actually just put a little bit of pressure on all of us. I'm going to say about 3 minutes. Okay, so if you're up for the challenge, I know you all can do it. Let's try to see what we can come up with in 3 minutes. Okay, good luck. And again, I'd love to hear from folks. What are some things that you would want to change? And that can be very personal. It can be change about yourself, change in your community, maybe change, be ambitious, right? Change in the world. What are some of those things that your powers would have an effect on? Okay, so what we'll do is, now that you have both of these lists, right? What are your superpowers and what you would like to change? I'm going to give you 5 minutes to try to combine those two, right? And so now we have material. Now we've brainstormed a little bit. We have some action verbs, right? That might be really helpful for us. And I want you to write essentially the poem where you are making that change, right? Where you are using the superpowers or just the powers that you've identified. And I give you about 5 minutes to do that, and maybe we'll have time if anyone wants to share anything at the very end. Okay, good luck, you all. 5 minutes. All right, take some time to finish up your last thought. I realize 5 minutes isn't a long time, but like any kind of writing, right? Maybe this is the first draft. Maybe hopefully it's getting you closer to a second draft or a third draft or a final draft. But I wanted to make space for anyone to maybe share something. You don't have to read your poem necessarily, but maybe talk about your process. Talk about kind of yeah, your process of going through this exercise. And then I believe Janine will kind of close up for us. Anyone want to share? Well, if not now, I'm hoping later. Great, that's great, Shalise. You said you didn't get the chance to finish, but you like the idea you came up with. That's all we can hope for sometimes, right? And that's a great place to start, right? There's some light in that idea, so congratulations. If you don't want to share now, I'm hoping that you'll share eventually, right? You can share it online, you can share it with family, you can share it with your community. You can send me a message on Instagram and I would love to read it and maybe give you some feedback. Thank you all for sharing space with me and making space for this poem, these poems, this poetry. Yeah, thank you to Break Bread, obviously, too.
Angel, thank you so much for being here. Like, we're the ones who need to be grateful. This was really fantastic. And, you know, it was really interesting with Ars Poetica because, of course, I'm old enough to remember, right?
Yeah.
Like all of that. And it's kind of wild. It's like, that was 2007.
Yeah.
That was only 2007.
Yeah.
You know, and thinking about the way we, the things we do to signal, right? Like now in the face of conflicts and things, right? So what a wonderful opportunity for us to like reflect on, and for younger people to kind of be thinking about all of that and our work as poets and writers. And so I'm so grateful that you brought that back to us and gave us a chance to hear from you. Another place, so Janine's going to drop links to Angel's work in the chat. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Break Bread and on behalf of the Public Library of Mount Vernon in Knox County. And Janine's going to make a quick announcement for us.
Yes. Thank you again, Angel. I really appreciated the lesson. I, believe it or not, this is not the first poem this week I've written under 5 minutes. But it was
No
a
pressure,
lot more
no
fun
pressure.
this
That's
time
great.
around. It was a lot more fun. Unfortunately, this is our last teen writing program, Creative Classroom. But we hope that if you enjoyed today's event, you'll join us for National Novel Writing Month at the Knox website, or connect with us at the NaNoWriMo website. The library's username for both, I think, is Knox Writes One. So we also have a couple meetups coming up. I don't remember the exact days, but I think Jamie can go more into that.
Yeah, if you're a young writer and you want to join us, we have a meeting in person if you're in Ohio next Wednesday. And then the following week on the 22nd, we have a virtual meeting. You can find all of this on the website. The other thing you can do if you had fun today is send your poem to Break Bread. We publish young writers and we're thick with them here. So this is fantastic. We'd love to hear from you. So big shout out again to Break Bread and of course to the Public Library of Mount Vernon and Knox County for hosting all of this and letting me do this. It's really been a pleasure, Angel, and thanks so much. Huge shout out to Janine, who is not only writing poems in 5 minutes, but making all of the Zoom magic happen. So there's a superpower, all right. Thanks a lot to everyone who's been with us, and we'll be posting this on our website. So check out our cool YouTube at www.knox.net. And until then, happy writing. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you all. Have a good night.